This is what Kyle said last night. Calipari had the National Player of the Year and lost to St. Pete. He had the National Freshman of the Year and a fifth-year senior who set the Cal Air scoring record and lost to Oakland. At some point, it's not them, it's. Exactly what is it is the question of the day in the Bluegrass and all around college basketball. Kyle, thanks for the time. No need to rehash the game. Anybody could figure out Kentucky was tight. They did not look well prepared. And in the moment, they let up many big shots as predicted because of their lack of defense. But the question everybody is asking, and you wrote about in The Athletic, is what now for Mitch Barnhart and John Calipari at the University of Kentucky? Good afternoon.
Is the big question, and it has to be asked at this point. John Calipari did a lot of incredible things in his first 10 years at Kentucky. He went to 7 Elite Eights and 4 Final Fours, and he won him a national title. There's no arguing the greatness in that. But over the last 4 years, there's been one SEC tournament win and one NCAA tournament win. And that, by any measure, in any era of Kentucky basketball history, is not good enough. And, the clip that you played, more frustrating to a lot of people than the results even. The clip that you played was in response to a question that I asked Cal last night, because so much of what he said was, we made a lot of mistakes, and if you look, we're a young team, and most of the mistakes were made by young guys. And every time they have looked bad or made mistakes this year, it is a rehashing of, we're a really young team. And that excuse doesn't fly anymore because you chose this. In the current era of college basketball, when you're at a program like Kentucky and a recruiter like John Calipari, you can get any kind of roster you want. You can be old if you want to be old. And he was old when they lost to St. Peter's. He tried that 1 year, and it didn't work, even with the National Player of the Year. And this year, he was very braggadocious. He finally got a number one class again. He'd always recruited well, but there was a little slip, and so he finally got this star-studded recruiting class again. He felt like he had a group of freshmen like he used to have at Kentucky. And he said on Media Day in October in Lexington, if you ask me experience or talent, I'll take talent every time because the talent usually figures it out. And it didn't figure it out this year. And you can't cry we're young when you chose to be young. In the transfer portal era, in the NIL era, you could have any roster you want at Kentucky. And this is the one he chose. And then that's no matter what it is. I mean, the players made mistakes. That guys were tight. Guys missed defensive assignments. Guys, were shy taking shots or missed shots, threw balls out of bounds. But you are the guy who shopped for the ingredients, and you're the guy who baked the cake. It's all on you at the end of the day. And I think the lack of accountability, and which is why I asked him after all the stuff about we're young, is what could you have done to help these guys? And he's talked about a timeout he should have called or a defense he should have gone to different. It was not a deeply reflective answer. And then even asked how he might change his approach going forward. He said he just couldn't see himself going away from freshmen, which is an insane thing to say in that moment.
Kyle, let's talk about the reality, because I spoke to somebody well-versed in college basketball circles earlier today, and I asked this person who was once in a position that Mitch Barnhart is currently in, what would you have done or what would you do if you were in Mitch Barnhart's position? He said, it depends. I said, depends on what? He said, if the buyout was not extreme, the decision would have already been made. But the question I have to you is, the buyout is extreme. How much is it? How can Kentucky deal with this issue, and can they afford to get rid of Cal?
Yeah, that is the question. Can they afford it, or are they willing to pay it? I think just about every school in the SEC can afford it. We know the kind of money that's coming in. It's just how much are you willing to spend to make somebody go away when you're then going to have to go spend a whole bunch of money to get the next guy. And you've got to hope that you don't miss on that next guy. But it's $33 million unless something gets negotiated, unless Cal, decides to leave. I think a lot of people today are thinking of this as Cal needs to be fired. The other, potential outcome is that Cal himself realizes that this thing has gone completely toxic on him, and it's going to be really hard to flip it without a fresh start. And he may want to go somewhere else. I'm not saying he will, but I think it's a possibility that has been floated to me a few times over the last 2 years. as the relationship with the fan base has soured, as his relationship with Mitch Barnhart, no matter what either side wants to say publicly, has not been particularly good or close over the last 3 or 4 years. That maybe after something like this, you just realize, I need a fresh start. And so if that were to happen, if he was to find a soft place to land where he thought he could win and take his number 2 recruiting class with him, which would be attractive to a lot of schools that are scuffling along right now. Maybe some name brand programs that just feel like they need a little juice, and John Calipari certainly brings the juice. Then that may be the most amicable way it could go. But Kentucky right now, if barring that, is really in a tough spot because they locked him into this quote-unquote lifetime contract in 2019, and the results have been the worst of his era since then. And they just owe him so much money if they decide they want out, and it feels like a lot of people want out now, and you're going to have to pay him big time to do it.
Kyle Tucker with us. Kyle, you sat with us a week ago in Nashville at the SEC, and you talked about having to get out of the first weekend, and even that didn't seem great, getting to the Sweet 16 because this program, this program is built on the Final Four and championships. But I think you alluded to, there's no way he can afford to lose a first-round game again. Well, he's done that now. So tell me, and I realize you've been in Pittsburgh, and but you hear from Kentucky fans, and you're around them. How would you describe their temperature today? And can they listen to the same stuff from Cal that they've been hearing the last couple of years? And quite frankly, none of it has come to fruition.
No, I think the messaging is it was already, I think, to this point, but now the messaging is white noise to the fan base. It's the same lines for 13, 14, 15 years. And, it's the same. I mean, in some ways, Cal's not different. He's still this sort of swaggering guy, but it plays a lot different when you're losing. He won a game at Auburn this year that was one of their biggest wins of the year. And instead of just coming in and talking about what his players did well and why that was an important win, he sort of paraded into the interview room to mock everyone who he said showed up to basically watch him lose, and na boo boo. And he spent the year really this whole season. Anytime there was a moderately good moment, kind of like you could tell he was ready to say "I told you so" to all of his critics, and now he has nothing to show for that. And I think people are just kind of tired of it. The act grows really weary if you're not winning. It's just like when he would say, this idea that he would say the SEC tournament doesn't really matter to him. He said that at the beginning, and nobody cared because he won it anyway. That's okay to say you don't care about the SEC tournament when you win it every year. It's not okay to say it when you haven't won it in 5 years. And things like that, the messaging wears thin on people when you're not as successful. People put up with a lot, or it just comes out differently. When you're super successful, it comes out like confidence and not as much like totally unjustified arrogance.
Kyle, as we wrap up here, and we deeply appreciate you being available, take us through what you think happens next, because it's hard to predict. Mitch Barnhart, one of the most respected ADs in the country, but he also keeps his cards very close. He let a women's basketball coach go 2 weeks ago, but there was obvious reasons for that. What do you think happens now?
I legitimately am not confident enough to say. I think because it's such a difficult position, sort of rock and a hard place position to be in. I think you're right. What you said earlier, that if the buyout was not prohibitive, it may have already been done, but it is prohibitive. $33 million, no matter how much you bring it in, to pay somebody not to coach is a lot of money. And even though he locked his coach into this sort of ridiculous contract, in general, Mitch Barnhart, the athletic director, is a pragmatic guy and a little more conservative in the way that he's going to throw money around. And it's hard for me to fathom him doing that, even though he's going to feel a lot of pressure to do it now. And so I just don't know. And I don't know what the machinations will be of if he can get in a room with John Calipari and they could hammer out an agreement for something less than $33 million or some way to try to salvage an amicable split. And so if barring all of that, the sort of the doomsday scenario in some ways is that nothing happens and there's this incredibly awkward season ahead next year where he will be relying on 6 freshmen that he's already signed. And he's already made reference to how great the group coming in is. The freshmen coming in, and the fan base does not want to hear that. And I would be fascinated if he's back, unless he has some major changes elsewhere within the program, staff or players brought in or whatever that could somehow excite people. What would Rep Arena look like on opening night next season?
And Kyle, that's what I want to end it here because if Cal ends up staying, you can't sell the recruiting class. I mean, we've heard that about 15, 16 times now, especially last year. Knowing how resilient Kentucky fans have been, and really even despite what this trend has been portending, and it has been a correct indicator, can he get them back? Other than the fact they are Kentucky True Blue, will they support him as the coach if next season arrives with him as the head coach?
I don't know. I'm pretty skeptical that the broader fan base would be super bought into that program next year, because there's just no universe in which you can sell. These freshmen are going to be great, because he couldn't have had better freshmen over the last several years than the ones he had this year. Not all of them lived up to the hype. Some that they thought were going to be really good weren't. But then Reed Shepherd and Rob Dillingham were unbelievable. They were some of the most fun players that we've seen at Kentucky. And Antonio Reeves, a fifth-year senior, was the highest-scoring player he's ever coached at Kentucky, and you didn't win with those guys. There's no world in which you convince fans that a less heralded group of freshmen than this one is going to come in and somehow have better results. I've said this a couple times. If I'm trying to squint and imagine a scenario where Cal gets some level of excitement back, and it is literally, take half of his salary and put in an NIL fund to get Reed Shepherd back. If somehow Reed Shepherd, the golden child, came back for a sophomore season and he came out and said, well, I came back because I love Cal and I want to play for Cal. And he said last night, Reed Shepherd said last night, it's not his fault. I love him. He's the greatest coach in the world. If he said that and then came back, maybe there's some level of hope that gets reignited. But short of that, I think it's going to be tough.
Kyle Tucker, thank you. Appreciate it very much. Kyle has been pretty on top of the story, prescient, and what he said would be the reaction if it happened again. And quite frankly, it was hard to believe it happened. Almost nobody saw Kentucky losing. In fact, many more people saw them winning it all. Dick Vitale, the prominent ESPN broadcaster, just days ago picked Kentucky to cut down the nets in early April. As we wrap up here, thinking about October when the season begins, the next one, and will Cal be the head coach at the University of Kentucky? That's the question we ask, and we're coming right back.